If you're new or returning to Unholy DK in the Midnight pre-patch, here's the good news. The class has been reworked and it is now much simpler. Unholy is basically a 2-resource spec with a few key effects that you need to maintain. And once you understand what each button is actually doing, you'll see how simple it really is. So in this guide I'm going to teach it from zero, like we're in school. We'll start with your resources, then your core buttons, then the talents that change how the kit works, and only then we'll go into your single target priority and one small AoE change that you need for Mythic Plus. Before we get into anything, this is the talent build I'm running for this video. I'm throwing it on the screen right now. If you want to copy it, the import string is in the description. This build is mainly used for Mythic Plus dungeons in the Midnight pre-patch. Alright, now that we have performed the secret art of copy-pasting a build we got off the internet without actually reading anything, let's go over our 2 resources. The first resource is runes. You have 6 runes and they regenerate over time. The important thing is how they recharge. They don't come back as one big bar. Each rune has its individual recharge timer. So when you spend one rune, that specific rune goes on cooldown and starts recharging until it's back. Spend multiple, you have multiple individual timers running at the same time. So when you hear rune management, that's what it means. You don't want to blow all 6 instantly and then stare at the boss with nothing to press. But you also don't want to sit on runes doing nothing. The second resource you have is Runic Power. Whenever you spend runes on your attacks, you generate Runic Power as a byproduct. Runic Power is the resource you can waste easily. You can only hold a certain amount, so if you keep generating it while you're capped, you're overcapping and losing damage. So the basic rule is to spend runes to perform certain attacks, then those attacks generate Runic Power, and then you spend that Runic Power so you don't overcap. And your Runic Power spenders are Death Coil on a single target, or alternatively Epidemic on AoE, multi-target.
Hello, Mr. Vats. Can you please start talking about how I play already? I'm getting bored.
One moment, little Jimmy. Do you know what our plagues are doing?
No?
Then shut the f*** up and listen. Before we even talk about your main rotation, you need to understand your plagues, because the next part relies on them. You have a spell called Outbreak. It costs 1 rune, and it applies 2 plagues to the target, Dread Plague and Virulent Plague. These are damage over time effects. They're not insanely important by themselves, but a lot of your kit cares that they exist. Dread Plague can only be applied to 1 host at a time, so only 1 target can have it, and Virulent Plague is the one that can be spread to all nearby enemies. So when you think, are my plagues up? You're thinking Dread Plague on the main target and Virulent Plague on everyone. Now let's talk about the attacks you spend runes on, and more importantly, what they're actually doing. Your main rune spender is Scourge Strike. It costs 1 rune, it deals damage, but the main value is that it causes your plagues, Dread Plague and Virulent Plague, to erupt. When Scourge Strike makes them erupt, they deal their damage an additional time at 35% effectiveness. However, you never want to use Scourge Strike just by itself. This is where Festering Strike comes in. Festering Strike costs more runes, but deals less damage than Scourge Strike. So the obvious question is, why would you use it? Because Festering Strike is what we call a setup tool. When you use Festering Strike, it empowers your weapon and causes your next 2 or 3 Scourge Strikes to summon a lesser ghoul. That lesser ghoul is just another minion that attacks your target for about 6-7 seconds. Actually, it's 7.6 seconds, but whatever. So every time you use Festering Strike, you're basically increasing the value of your upcoming Scourge Strikes. You're investing runes now, so your next Scourge Strikes pay you back with extra minions. Now is a good time to mention a talent we spec'd into. You're probably sitting there thinking, wait, what talent? Remember when we copied the build that you didn't read and all of the talents we chose? Don't worry, almost no one does. When you spec into Festering Scythe, it turns every second Festering Strike into Festering Scythe. So when you press Festering Strike, then the next one becomes Festering Scythe. Then the next one is Festering Strike again, then Scythe, and so on. Also, Festering Scythe is free, but what does it actually do? It hits all enemies within 14 yards in front of you, and it hastens all of your plagues on the targets you hit, meaning both Dread Plague and Virulent Plague take 35% faster for the next 25 seconds. That's important enough that it becomes a rule you have to maintain. Because that effect lasts 25 seconds, you want to make sure you cast Festering Scythe at least once every 25 seconds, so you keep that Plague Haste effect active. Alright, now let's talk about Putrify, a newcomer in our arsenal of abilities, which was implemented in the Midnight pre-patch. Putrify is another rune spender. It has 2 charges, and each charge has a 30-second recharge timer. What it does is it summons a lesser ghoul to strike your enemy, and then that ghoul explodes and deals additional damage to nearby enemies. But why is it important? Putrify is important because we spec'd into that talent called Blightburst, which gives you a passive that modifies Putrify's explosion. Blightburst make it so Putrify's explosion extends the duration of your plagues by 4 seconds and deals 35% of the damage those plagues would have dealt over that time instantly. And on top of that, because of Blightburst, Putrify now applies your plagues to unaffected targets, meaning both Dread Plague and Virulent Plague. So in a sense, you don't have to use Outbreak to spread your plagues now. If you use Putrify, it will just spread your plagues. So that's one less thing you have to worry about. Alright, we're done with rune spending abilities. Now we generated a lot of our secondary resource, Runic Power. But should you just spend it immediately? No, dummy. We have to proc Sudden Doom.
Mr. Vats, what is Sudden Doom?
Remember the plagues we talked about? Those plagues have a 35% chance to proc the talent Sudden Doom. When Sudden Doom procs, your next Death Coil or Epidemic costs 10 less Runic Power and deals 35% increased damage. You want to make use of Sudden Doom whenever it procs, because it's literally giving you a cheaper and a harder hitting spender. In this build, you're using a really important talent called Harbinger of Doom. Harbinger of Doom does 2 major things. First, it makes Sudden Doom trigger 30% more often, and it can accumulate up to 2 charges. So, instead of Sudden Doom being 35% chance to proc, now it procs at 65%. And because you can store 2 charges, you can use them when it makes sense instead of being forced to immediately press the first proc you see. And second, Harbinger has a secondary effect. Whenever you're summoning a lesser ghoul with Scourge Strike, it reduces the cooldown of Putrify by 2.5 seconds. Now that we understand how our basic abilities interact with our resources, we can get into our major cooldowns. Our first cooldown is called Dark Transformation, which is a 45-second cooldown. What it does is it evolves your main ghoul into a bigger ghoul and greatly empowers them for 12 seconds. And every time you cast Death Coil or Epidemic, it extends the duration of Dark Transformation by 1 second. So inside a Dark Transformation window, your Runic Power spenders literally extend your empowered pet's duration. That's why good Runic Power management matters so much. Now for your big cooldown, Army of the Dead. Army of the Dead is a 1.5 minute cooldown, it costs 1 rune, and it summons 6 lesser ghouls plus an abomination to aid you for a certain amount of time. When you press Army, you're committing to a big moment, and it's part of your top priority. Alright, finally, now that we understand what each of our buttons does, here's your single target priority list, so you can arrange them from the most important thing you need to do to the least important. The first priority is always cooldowns. Cast Army of the Dead on cooldown. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown and it costs 1 rune. And then you cast Dark Transformation on cooldown. It's a 45-second cooldown and it lasts 12 seconds. And of course, it can be extended by Death Coil or Epidemic. And here's a really good way to think about their timing. Army is 90 seconds. Dark Transformation is 45 seconds, so Dark Transformation comes up twice per army cycle. That means you can press Dark Transformation the moment it comes off cooldown every time. And every other use of it naturally lines up with army when it comes off cooldown, so you don't need to hold Dark Transformation, just use it on cooldown and it syncs automatically. Your next priority is Putrify. Use Putrify on cooldown. Never cap on the 2 charges you have, always keep it cycling. Your next priority is to cast Festering Scythe if any target doesn't have the debuff, or the debuff is just about to expire. It's important to maintain because it makes your diseases, both Dread Plague and Virulent Plague, take 35% faster for 25 seconds, so you want to refresh it at least once every 25 seconds. After that, you cast Death Coil if you have a Sudden Doom proc, or if you have 80 or more Runic Power. This is mainly to avoid overcapping on Runic Power or overcapping on Sudden Doom procs. Don't forget, with the Harbinger of Doom talent, you can stack up to 2 Sudden Doom procs, so you don't need to instantly spend the first proc you see. Take care of the higher priorities first, but you also don't want to sit on 2 procs and cap Runic Power at the same time. Now we're getting into the lower priorities. You can cast Festering Strike if you have no lesser ghoul stacks to empower your Scourge Strikes. Only then you would want to cast Scourge Strike if you have lesser ghoul stacks. Never cast it without it being empowered. That's just a waste of runes, and runes are a precious resource. And finally, if you have absolutely nothing else to do, you can cast Death Coil even if you're not close to capping Runic Power, and even if you don't have a Sudden Doom proc. This shouldn't happen frequently if you're playing correctly, but it's the fallback button, so you're never just standing there. AoE differences are pretty easy. It's the exact same priority list as single target with one small change. If you're fighting 4 or more targets, you swap Death Coil for Epidemic. Up until 3 targets, you essentially perform the single target priority exactly as we already stated. That's it. It's that simple. Alright, that's Unholy Death Knight for the Midnight pre-patch. If you're new or returning, then I really hope this video was helpful for you to understand how Unholy Death Knight works. If you have any questions or want me to clarify something, drop it down in the comments below and I'll try to answer. If this guide has indeed helped you, hit the like button and subscribe for more World of Warcraft guides just like this one. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.